The blood on Victoria Vaughn's hands had long since washed away, but the stain on her soul remained as vivid as the day she pulled the trigger 3 years ago in the summer of 1876. She stepped off the stagecoach in Palisade, Colorado, clutching a worn carpetbag that held everything she owned in this world, her eyes scanning the dusty Main Street for any sign of recognition or judgment. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small mining town nestled against the red rock formations, and she could already feel the sweat beginning to form beneath her high-collared black dress. Nobody here knew her story, and she intended to keep it that way. The boarding house was easy enough to find. A 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a hand-painted sign that read Widow Murphy's, respectable lodging. Victoria climbed the creaking steps and knocked on the door, preparing the story she had rehearsed countless times during the long journey from Missouri. A round-faced woman with graying hair answered, her eyes immediately assessing the new arrival with the practiced gaze of someone who had seen every type of woman the West had to offer. "I need a room," Victoria said quietly, keeping her voice steady despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. "I can pay 2 weeks in advance, and I am looking for work." The widow's expression softened slightly. "You running from something or someone?" Victoria met her gaze directly. "My past, madam. Nothing more." That seemed to satisfy the older woman, who opened the door wider and gestured for Victoria to enter. The interior was clean if sparse, with simple furniture and faded curtains that had once been a cheerful yellow. "Name's Margaret Murphy. I have a room on the 2nd floor, faces the back so it stays cooler in the afternoons. As for work, the general store might be hiring, and the hotel sometimes needs help with laundry and cleaning." Victoria nodded gratefully and followed Margaret up the narrow staircase to a small room that contained a bed, a washstand, and a single chair positioned near the window. It was more than she deserved, she thought bitterly, setting her carpetbag on the floor. After Margaret left, Victoria sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment of weakness, pressing her hands to her face as the memories threatened to surface. She had killed a man. Not in self-defense, though her lawyer had argued otherwise. Her husband, Thomas, had been cruel and violent, but the night she shot him, he had been passed out drunk, defenseless. The jury had acquitted her after hearing testimony about the years of abuse, the broken bones, the terror. But Victoria knew the truth. She had stood over his sleeping form with his own pistol and made a choice. The fact that he might have killed her eventually did not change what she had done. The following morning, Victoria presented herself at the general store wearing her best dress, a simple gray cotton that was patched but clean. The proprietor, a balding man named Samuel Hendricks, looked her up and down with undisguised skepticism. "You ever worked in a store before?" "No, sir, but I can read and write. I am good with numbers and I am a hard worker," Victoria replied, keeping her hands folded in front of her to hide their trembling. Hendricks grunted. "I will give you a trial period. $3 a week, 6 days, opening to closing. You steal from me, you are out on your ear." $3 was barely enough to pay for her room and food, but Victoria nodded acceptance. She needed to establish herself, to build a new life where the whispers of murderess could not reach her. The work was tedious but mercifully consuming. She swept floors, stocked shelves, waited on customers, and learned the rhythm of the small town. Miners came down from the hills with their pockets full of wages. Farmers brought their wives to purchase fabric and supplies, and children pressed their noses against the glass jars of penny candy. It was during her 2nd week that she first saw Dalton Zimmerman. He walked into the store with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, tall and broad-shouldered with sun-darkened skin, and eyes the color of a storm rolling across the plains. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, dusty boots, worn denim pants, a faded shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. When he removed the hat, Victoria noticed the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, damp with sweat from the heat outside. "Morning, Sam," he said to the proprietor, his voice a low rumble that carried easily through the store. "I need supplies for the ranch. Got a list here." Victoria busied herself with organizing spools of thread, trying not to stare as Dalton handed over a piece of paper and engaged in easy conversation with Hendricks. She could feel his presence like a physical thing, a warmth that seemed to fill the entire space. When Hendricks called her over to help gather the items, she approached with her eyes downcast, taking the list with hands that had begun to tremble again for entirely different reasons. "You must be new in town," Dalton said conversationally as she moved around the store, collecting flour, coffee, sugar, and various other supplies. "I am Dalton Zimmerman. My family runs a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of here." "Victoria Vaughn," she replied quietly, not meeting his eyes. "I've been here 2 weeks. Welcome to Palisade, Miss Vaughn." There was genuine warmth in his voice that made her chest ache with an emotion she could not quite name. "It is a good town, good people mostly." She nodded, carrying the supplies to the counter where Hendricks began tallying the cost. Dalton paid without complaint, a stack of bills that suggested the Zimmerman ranch was doing well. As he gathered his purchases, his eyes met hers for just a moment, and Victoria felt something shift inside her, a crack in the carefully constructed wall she had built around her heart. "Thank you for your help, Miss Vaughn," he said, and then he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of leather and sage. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Victoria allowed herself to think about Dalton Zimmerman. It was foolish, she knew. She had no business even considering the possibility of any kind of relationship. She was damaged goods, a woman with blood on her hands and guilt in her heart. A good man like Dalton deserved someone pure and untainted, someone who could give him a life free from the shadows that haunted her every waking moment. The weeks passed in a blur of work and careful anonymity. Victoria kept to herself, declining invitations from other boarders to attend church socials or town dances. She ate her meals alone, spent her Sundays reading in her room, and tried to ignore the loneliness that threatened to consume her. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Dalton Zimmerman became a regular customer at the general store, appearing every week or two for supplies. Each time, he made a point of speaking to Victoria, asking about her day, commenting on the weather, sharing small stories about life on the ranch. She responded with polite brevity, never encouraging deeper conversation but unable to bring herself to be truly cold. There was something about him that drew her despite her best efforts to remain distant. One afternoon in late September, as Victoria was sweeping the front porch of the store, a commotion erupted down the street. A horse had broken loose from its tether and was charging down the main road, terrified by something only it could see. People scattered, and Victoria watched in horror as a small boy, no more than 6 years old, froze in the middle of the street, too frightened to move. Without thinking, Victoria dropped the broom and ran into the street, her skirts flying as she reached the boy and shoved him toward the wooden sidewalk. She felt the horse's hot breath, saw its wild eyes, and then strong hands grabbed her around the waist and pulled her backward. She crashed into a solid chest as the horse thundered past, missing them by inches. "Are you out of your mind?" Dalton's voice was rough with fear and anger as he held her against him, his heart pounding so hard she could feel it through his shirt. "You could have been killed." Victoria struggled to catch her breath, aware suddenly of how close they were, of the strength in the arms that still held her. "The boy," she managed to say, twisting to see the child being scooped up by his weeping mother, "is safe because you are either the bravest or most foolish woman I have ever met," Dalton said, finally releasing her but keeping one hand on her arm as if afraid she might bolt into danger again. "Victoria, you cannot just throw yourself into harm's way like that." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it from his lips made something warm unfurl in her chest. She looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw genuine concern in those storm-gray eyes. "I could not let him get hurt," she said simply. A small crowd had gathered, people thanking her, the boy's mother crying and trying to express her gratitude. Victoria felt overwhelmed by the attention, by the eyes watching her, and she pulled away from Dalton's grip. "I need to get back to work," she muttered, hurrying back to the store despite his calls for her to wait. That evening, after the store closed, Victoria found Dalton waiting outside the boarding house. He was leaning against the porch railing, his hat in his hands, and he straightened when he saw her approaching. "Miss Vaughn," he said formally, then shook his head. "Victoria, I wanted to make sure you were all right. That was quite a scare this afternoon." "I am fine," she said, moving toward the steps. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Zimmerman." "Dalton," he corrected. "Please. And I was hoping you might allow me to buy you dinner, as a thank you for your bravery today." Victoria's first instinct was to refuse, but something in his expression stopped her. He looked hopeful and nervous, like a boy asking a girl to a dance for the first time. It would be cruel to reject him outright, and she found she did not want to. "That is not necessary," she said carefully. "I did what anyone would have done." "But you are the one who did it," Dalton pressed gently. "Please, just dinner. The hotel dining room serves a decent meal, and it would give me peace of mind to know you have eaten properly after such an ordeal." Against her better judgment, Victoria nodded. "All right, just dinner." The hotel dining room was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps that cast a warm glow over the assembled diners. Dalton pulled out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy, and Victoria found herself relaxing slightly as they ordered simple fare of roast chicken, potatoes, and vegetables. "Tell me about yourself," Dalton said once the food arrived. "Where are you from originally?" Victoria tensed, the carefully rehearsed story coming to her lips. "Missouri. I was widowed last year and decided to make a fresh start out west." It was not entirely a lie. Thomas was dead and she had been his legal wife. The circumstances were what she omitted. "I am sorry for your loss," Dalton said with genuine sympathy. "It takes courage to start over in a new place." "And you?" Victoria asked, eager to turn the conversation away from herself. "Have you always lived in Colorado?" Dalton nodded, his expression softening with memory. "My parents came out here in '68, right after the railroad made it through. They bought land and started the ranch with just a few head of cattle and a lot of dreams. I was 10 years old, scared to death and excited all at once." He smiled. "Now we run about 300 head, have good grazing land, and a house my father built with his own hands." "It sounds like a good life," Victoria said, meaning it. "It is. Hard work, but honest. There is something about working the land, raising cattle, being part of the natural rhythm of things." He paused, his eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I think you would like it out at the ranch. It is peaceful. A person can think out there, find some space from whatever troubles them." Victoria looked down at her plate. "I am sure it is lovely." "You carry a lot of weight, Victoria," Dalton said softly. "I can see it in your eyes." Whatever you are running from, whatever happened before you came here, it does not have to define who you are now. Her throat tightened with unshed tears. You do not know what you are talking about. Maybe not, he conceded, but I know what I see. A woman who threw herself in front of a runaway horse to save a child. A woman who works hard and keeps to herself because she is afraid to let anyone get close. A woman who deserves kindness even if she does not think she does. Please stop, Victoria whispered, her hands clenching in her lap. You do not understand. Then help me understand, Dalton urged, reaching across the table to gently cover her hand with his. His touch was warm and solid, anchoring her to the present moment. I am not asking for your secrets, Victoria. I am just asking for a chance to know you. She pulled her hand away, fighting the urge to run from the dining room. I am not a good person, Dalton. I have done things, terrible things. You should stay away from me. I do not believe that, he said firmly, and I am not going anywhere. The meal continued in strained silence after that, Victoria pushing food around her plate while Dalton watched her with patient concern. When they finally left the hotel, he walked her back to the boarding house despite her protests. At the door, he paused and looked down at her with such tenderness that Victoria felt her carefully constructed defenses begin to crumble. I meant what I said, Dalton told her. I am not going anywhere. Whatever you think disqualifies you from happiness or companionship, you are wrong. Everyone deserves a second chance, Victoria. Everyone. She fled inside without responding, climbing the stairs to her room with her heart pounding and tears finally spilling down her cheeks. That night, she dreamed of blood and gunfire, of Thomas's lifeless body, and of storm-gray eyes that promised redemption she could never accept. The next morning, Victoria fully expected and even hoped that Dalton would take her warnings to heart and keep his distance. But when she arrived at the general store, she found a small bouquet of wildflowers waiting on the steps with a note written in bold, masculine handwriting. For the bravest woman in Palisade, your friend Dalton. Hendricks noticed the flowers when she brought them inside, his eyebrows rising. Got yourself an admirer, Miss Vaughn. Just a kind gesture, Victoria said quickly, finding a jar to use as a makeshift vase. She placed the flowers on the counter where she could see them throughout the day, and despite her misgivings, their bright colors lifted her spirits. Over the following weeks, Dalton's pursuit was gentle but persistent. He continued to visit the store regularly, always finding excuses to talk with her. He brought her little gifts, a pretty stone he found on a ride, a book he thought she might enjoy, fresh apples from a tree on the ranch. Victoria tried to maintain her distance, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Dalton had a way of making her laugh, of drawing her out of her self-imposed isolation with stories and observations that revealed a sharp wit and kind heart. One Saturday afternoon in October, as Victoria was helping close the store, Dalton appeared with a proposition. Tomorrow is Sunday, he said. Come out to the ranch. Let me show you around, introduce you to my family. No pressure, just a day away from town. I do not think that is a good idea, Victoria began, but Dalton held up a hand. My mother is eager to meet you. The whole town has been talking about how you saved the Carson boy, and Ma thinks anyone that brave deserves a home-cooked meal. He grinned. Besides, my younger sister Catherine will not stop pestering me to bring you by. She is 18 and desperate for female company that is not our mother. The mention of his family gave Victoria pause. She had been so focused on keeping Dalton at arm's length that she had not considered the implications of his interest. Your family knows about me. They know I have been spending time with a wonderful woman named Victoria Vaughn, Dalton said. They know you are new to town and that you work hard. They know I care about you, and that is enough for them." "You should not care about me," Victoria said desperately. "Dalton, I am serious. I am not worthy of your attention or your family's hospitality." "Let me be the judge of that," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Come tomorrow, please. If after meeting my family and seeing the ranch you still want nothing to do with me, I will respect that and keep my distance. But give me this one chance." Victoria knew she should refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to protect this good man from the darkness she carried. But the loneliness was crushing, and the thought of spending even one day as a normal woman, free from guilt and isolation, was too tempting to resist. "All right," she heard herself say. "One visit." The joy that lit up Dalton's face made her chest ache. "I will pick you up at 9 o'clock. Wear something comfortable for riding." That night, Victoria stood in front of her small mirror and wondered what she was doing. The face that looked back at her was thin and drawn, with shadows under the eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. She was 23 years old but felt ancient, worn down by guilt and fear. How could she walk into Dalton's family home and pretend to be someone worthy of their welcome? The next morning arrived too quickly. Victoria dressed in her most practical outfit, a brown skirt and white blouse that would survive the dust of the ride. When she came downstairs, Margaret Murphy was waiting with a knowing smile. "That Zimmerman boy finally talked you into something." "Just a visit to the ranch," Victoria said, trying to sound casual. "Those are good people," Margaret said approvingly. "Robert Zimmerman is as honest as they come, and Sarah is a fine woman. You could do worse than getting involved with that family." Before Victoria could protest that she was not getting involved with anyone, Dalton arrived in a wagon drawn by 2 sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the seat with careful courtesy, and they set off toward the north, leaving Palisade behind as they followed a rutted road into rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional juniper tree. "The ranch is about an hour's ride," Dalton explained as they traveled. "We are lucky to have good water access from the Colorado River. That is what sold my father on the land originally. Plenty of grass for the cattle and water year-round." Victoria nodded, trying to focus on his words rather than the solid warmth of his body beside her on the narrow seat. The October air was crisp and clear, and she found herself relaxing despite her anxiety. There was something peaceful about the landscape, the endless sky and the red rock formations that rose like ancient sentinels in the distance. The Zimmerman ranch house came into view as they crested a low hill, a sprawling single-story structure built of timber and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Beyond it, she could see a barn, several outbuildings and corrals containing horses and cattle. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they drew closer, a woman emerged onto the porch, shading her eyes to watch their approach. "That is my mother," Dalton said, and Victoria could hear the affection in his voice. Sarah Zimmerman was a handsome woman in her early 50s, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent eyes that assessed Victoria with frank curiosity. "Welcome, Miss Vaughn," she said warmly, coming down the steps to greet them. "Dalton has told us so much about you." "All good, I hope," Victoria said, accepting the older woman's hand. "All very good," Sarah confirmed. "Come inside. Dinner will be ready soon, but I thought we could have coffee and get acquainted first." The interior of the ranch house was warm and welcoming, with comfortable furniture and personal touches that spoke of a family who loved their home. A tall man with graying hair and the same build as Dalton rose from a chair near the fireplace, and a young woman with dark curls and bright eyes practically bounced across the room. "Miss Vaughn, I am Catherine Zimmerman," the girl said enthusiastically. "I am so pleased to finally meet you." Dalton has been absolutely insufferable with his mooning about. Catherine, Dalton warned, but his sister just laughed. It is true. He comes home from every trip to town talking about Victoria this and Victoria that. We were beginning to think you were a figment of his imagination. Victoria felt her cheeks heat, but before she could respond, Robert Zimmerman stepped forward and offered his hand. "Welcome to our home, Miss Vaughn. Any friend of Dalton's is welcome here." The afternoon that followed was unlike anything Victoria had experienced in years. The Zimmerman family was warm and boisterous, with easy affection and constant good-natured teasing. Dinner was a feast of roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables from Sarah's garden, and apple pie that melted on the tongue. The conversation flowed around the table, stories about ranch life, questions about Victoria's impressions of Palisade, and Catherine's animated descriptions of an upcoming town dance. "You will come, will you not?" Catherine asked Victoria hopefully. "It is next weekend at the community hall. Everyone attends, and there is music and dancing and food. It would be so wonderful to have another young woman to talk to." "I do not really dance," Victoria began, but Catherine waved away the objection. "Dalton can teach you. He is quite good, actually, though he pretends to be all rough and cowboyish. He waltzed with me just last month and only stepped on my feet twice." "Once," Dalton corrected, throwing a napkin at his sister. "And that was because you were leading." After dinner, Dalton offered to show Victoria around the ranch. They walked down to the corrals where several horses were grazing, and Dalton pointed out his favorites, describing their personalities with the same care someone might use for beloved friends. "That bay mare there, that is Rosie. She was my first horse, a gift from my father when I turned 12. She is getting old now, but she is still the best riding horse we have." Victoria reached through the fence to touch Rosie's soft nose. "She is beautiful. Would you like to ride her?" Dalton asked. "I can saddle up another horse and we can take a short ride if you want. There is a spot about a mile from here where you can see the whole valley." She should say no. She should thank him for the lovely day and insist on returning to town. But Victoria found herself nodding, and within minutes, Dalton had saddled both Rosie and a tall black gelding named Ace. He helped Victoria mount, his hands gentle and respectful as he adjusted her stirrups, and then they were riding out across the open grassland. The spot Dalton had mentioned was a small rise overlooking the valley, with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. They dismounted and stood side by side, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Victoria felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tight knot of guilt and shame she had carried for so long. "Thank you for today," she said quietly. "Your family is wonderful." "They like you," Dalton replied, turning to face her. "Catherine is already planning how to convince you to move out here and be her sister." Victoria smiled despite the ache in her chest. She should not get her hopes up. "Why not?" Dalton asked, his voice suddenly serious. He reached out and gently turned her to face him, his hands warm on her shoulders. "Victoria, I know you think you are not good enough, that something in your past makes you unworthy of happiness. But I am standing here telling you that is not true. Whatever you think you are, whatever you think you have done, it does not matter to me." "It should matter," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "Dalton, if you knew the truth about me, you would not be saying these things." "Then tell me," he urged. "Tell me the truth and let me prove you wrong." The words bubbled up like water from a spring too long trapped underground. "I killed my husband," Victoria said, the confession ripping from her throat. 3 years ago, I took his gun and I shot him while he was passed out drunk. The jury called it self-defense because of the beatings, but I knew what I was doing. I stood over him and I made a choice. I am a murderer, Dalton. That is the truth of who I am. She expected horror, rejection, disgust. Instead, Dalton's hands tightened on her shoulders, and when she finally dared to look up at him, she saw only compassion in those storm-gray eyes. "How long did he beat you?" Dalton asked quietly. "What? How long? Months? Years?" Victoria's throat constricted. 4 years. "We married when I was 17. He seemed so charming at first, but after the wedding, everything changed. He drank, and when he drank, he became violent. I lost 2 babies because of his fists. The doctor said I might never carry a child to term because of the damage." Dalton pulled her into his arms, and Victoria collapsed against his chest, sobs tearing from her in great heaving gasps. "I am so sorry," he murmured into her hair. "Victoria, I am so sorry you went through that, but listen to me, you are not a murderer, you are a survivor. You did what you had to do to stay alive. But I am damaged," Victoria choked out. "I am broken inside, Dalton. I am not worthy of a good man like you." "Stop saying that," Dalton said fiercely, pulling back to cup her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away her tears with infinite tenderness. "You are worthy of everything good in this world. You are strong and brave and kind. What happened to you was not your fault, and what you did to survive does not make you a bad person." "How can you say that? How can you possibly want anything to do with me?" "Because I see you," Dalton said simply. "The real you, not the guilt and shame you wrap around yourself like armor. I see a woman who risked her life to save a child. A woman who works hard and treats everyone with respect. A woman who deserves to be cherished and protected, not punished for doing what she had to do." Victoria closed her eyes, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. "I do not know how to believe you." "Then let me prove it to you," Dalton said softly. "Let me show you every day that you are worthy. Let me be the man who helps you see yourself as I see you." He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it felt like a benediction. Victoria froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the sensation, by the tenderness in his touch. Then something inside her released, and she kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck as she allowed herself, just for a moment, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Victoria Vaughn. I know it is too soon to say it, but I do not care. I see the woman you are, and I am falling harder every day." "I do not know how to do this," Victoria whispered. "I do not know how to let someone in." "Then we will figure it out together," Dalton promised. "One day at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just you and me, learning each other." They rode back to the ranch house as darkness fell, and Sarah insisted Victoria stay for supper despite her protests about imposing. The evening meal was lighter than the afternoon feast, but no less warm and welcoming. Catherine monopolized Victoria's attention, chattering about everything and nothing, and Robert engaged Dalton in a discussion about cattle prices that clearly bored both women. When Dalton finally drove Victoria back to Palisade, the moon was high and bright, turning the landscape silver. They rode in comfortable silence, Victoria's head resting against Dalton's shoulder, his arm around her waist to steady her on the wagon seat. At the boarding house, he helped her down and walked her to the door. "Will you come to the dance with me next weekend?" he asked. Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I would like that." "Good." He kissed her again, soft and sweet. "Sleep well, Victoria." That night, for the first time in 3 years, Victoria slept without nightmares. The week leading up to the dance passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Victoria threw herself into her work at the general store, but her mind kept drifting to Dalton, to the feel of his arms around her, to the way he had looked at her with such unwavering acceptance. She spent her evenings at the boarding house altering one of her dresses, a dark blue cotton that had been packed away since before Thomas's death. Margaret Murphy noticed her unusual energy and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Dalton Zimmerman appeared at the store midweek, ostensibly to purchase thread but clearly there to visit Victoria. "I am so glad you are coming to the dance," the younger girl said enthusiastically. "Dalton has been whistling around the ranch all week. I have never seen him like this." "He should not get his hopes up," Victoria said automatically, but Catherine shook her head. "Why not? You clearly care about him and he is absolutely smitten with you. I think it is wonderful." Victoria bit her lip. "Catherine, there are things about me, about my past, that are not wonderful. I am not the ideal woman for your brother." "But you are," Catherine insisted. "I can see it in the way he looks at you, the way he talks about you. Dalton is one of the best men I know, and he deserves someone special. That is you, Victoria." The simple faith in the young woman's voice made Victoria's eyes sting with tears. "I hope you are right." Saturday arrived bright and clear, one of those perfect autumn days when the sky seemed impossibly blue, and the air carried a hint of winter's approach. Victoria spent the afternoon preparing, washing her hair and carefully arranging it into a style that was more elaborate than her usual simple bun. The blue dress fit well after her alterations, and she studied herself in the mirror with a critical eye. She would never be a beauty, but she looked respectable, presentable. It would have to be enough. Dalton arrived promptly at 6 o'clock, and the look on his face when he saw her made all Victoria's efforts worthwhile. "You are beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The community hall was already filling with people when they arrived, families and young couples gathering for what was clearly one of the town's main social events. A small group of musicians was setting up in one corner, tuning fiddles and checking the upright piano. Catherine spotted them immediately and rushed over, resplendent in a pink dress that matched her excited energy. "You came. Oh, Victoria, you look lovely. Come on, let me introduce you to everyone." Before Victoria could protest, Catherine was dragging her around the hall, introducing her to what seemed like half of Palisade. There was Emily Hawkins, the schoolteacher, a serious young woman with sharp eyes and a warm smile. There were the Morgans, who owned one of the larger farms in the area. There was Dr. Wallace, a kind elderly man who had delivered most of the babies in town for the past 20 years. Everyone was friendly, welcoming, treating Victoria as if she belonged. When the music finally started, Dalton reclaimed her from his sister's enthusiastic custody. "May I have this dance?" Victoria felt a flutter of panic. "I told you, I do not really know how to dance." "Then let me teach you," Dalton said, leading her onto the floor. He positioned her hands correctly, one on his shoulder and the other clasped in his, and began to move to the music. "Just follow my lead. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. There, you see, you are a natural." It took a few moments for Victoria to find the rhythm, but Dalton was patient and steady, guiding her through the waltz with confident ease. She found herself relaxing into the movement, into the sensation of being held by him, of being part of something normal and joyful. Around them, other couples swirled, and Victoria saw Margaret Murphy dancing with Robert Zimmerman, Catherine laughing as a young cowboy tried to keep up with her energetic steps. "Are you having a good time?" Dalton asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes," Victoria admitted. "I cannot remember the last time I felt this happy." "Good. Get used to it." Dalton pulled her slightly closer, within the bounds of propriety but enough that she could feel the solid strength of him. "Because I intend to make you happy as often as possible." They danced several more sets, pausing only to refresh themselves with punch, and to allow Dalton to fulfill his promise to dance with his mother. Victoria found herself claimed by Robert Zimmerman for a surprisingly graceful waltz, and then by several other men from the town, who seemed eager to dance with the newcomer who had saved the Carson boy. It was during one of these dances, with a pleasant but forgettable young man whose name Victoria had already forgotten, that she saw them. Two men standing near the entrance to the hall, dressed in the dark suits and distinctive badges of law enforcement. They were speaking to Hendricks, and even from across the room, Victoria could see the store owner pointing in her direction. The blood drained from her face. They had found her. Somehow, despite all her precautions, despite the hundreds of miles between Palisade and Missouri, they had tracked her down. The song ended, and Victoria mumbled an excuse to her dance partner, searching frantically for Dalton. She found him near the refreshment table, laughing at something his sister had said, and the sight of his carefree expression made her heart break. This was it. This was where her brief moment of happiness ended and the consequences of her past caught up with her. She could run, try to slip out the back, but where would she go? And why delay the inevitable? Victoria squared her shoulders and walked toward the two lawmen, her hands clenched at her sides. "Are you Victoria Vaughn?" the taller of the two men asked as she approached. He had a drooping mustache and tired eyes that suggested he had seen too much of the world's darkness. "Yes," Victoria said quietly, aware that people were starting to stare. "I am Victoria Vaughn. Madam, I am Marshal Davis, and this is my deputy, Marshal Reed. We need to ask you some questions about a matter back in Missouri." Dalton appeared at her elbow, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "What is going on?" "This is between us and Miss Vaughn," Marshal Davis said firmly. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to step aside." "Like hell," Dalton said flatly. "Victoria, what is this about?" Victoria felt tears burning in her eyes. "It is my past catching up with me," she said. "Dalton, I am sorry. I am so sorry." "Miss Vaughn," Marshal Davis continued, his voice gentler now, "were you formerly Victoria Vaughn, married name Victoria Harrison of Springfield, Missouri?" "Yes," Victoria whispered. "And did you shoot and kill your husband, Thomas Harrison, in the summer of 1876? The hall had gone completely silent. Victoria could feel every eye on her, the weight of their judgment crushing. "Yes, but I was acquitted. The jury found me not guilty." Marshal Davis nodded. "Yes, madam, we know. That is not why we are here. We are here because Thomas Harrison had a brother, Garrett Harrison. Does that name mean anything to you?" Victoria frowned. Thomas had mentioned a brother once or twice, but they had never met. "I know of him, but we were never introduced." "Well, Garrett has been making inquiries about you," Marshal Reed said. "He believes you murdered his brother in cold blood and that the trial was a miscarriage of justice. He has been trying to locate you, and we have reason to believe he may be headed this way." The bottom dropped out of Victoria's world. "What do you mean, headed this way?" "Garrett Harrison is wanted for several violent crimes across 3 states, Marshal Davis explained. "Assault, armed robbery, and we suspect he killed a man in Kansas 2 months ago, though we cannot prove it. When we heard he was asking questions about a widow who moved to Colorado, we started tracking both of you. Miss Vaughn, we think he means to hurt you." Dalton's arm came around Victoria's shoulders, protective and fierce. "Then you need to arrest him." "We would if we could find him," Marshal Reed said, "but he has gone to ground. We are here to warn Miss Vaughn and to offer protection if she needs it." "She will stay at our ranch," Dalton said immediately. "She will be safe there." Marshal Davis shook his head. "With all due respect, son, unless you have experience dealing with dangerous men, your ranch might not be the safest place. We can arrange for Miss Vaughn to stay in protective custody until Harrison is apprehended." "No," Victoria said, finding her voice. "No, I am not going to hide like a criminal. I did nothing wrong. I was acquitted and I have been trying to build a new life. I will not let Thomas's brother take that away from me." "Victoria, be reasonable," Dalton urged. "If this man is dangerous, you need to be somewhere safe." "I will be safe in my room at the boarding house," Victoria said stubbornly. "Margaret keeps the doors locked, and I have done nothing to warrant being locked up again." The word "again" slipped out before she could stop it, and Victoria saw understanding dawn in Dalton's eyes. She had been in a cell after shooting Thomas, waiting for trial, living in a cage while lawyers argued over whether her life was worth saving. "All right," Marshal Davis said slowly, "but we will be keeping watch on the boarding house and around town. If Harrison shows up, we will be ready. In the meantime, Miss Vaughn, I strongly advise you not to go anywhere alone." The marshals departed, leaving behind a buzz of speculation and gossip. Victoria stood frozen in the center of the hall, acutely aware of the stares and whispers. She had been exposed, her carefully guarded secret laid bare for all of Palisade to judge. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the exit, desperate for air, for escape, for anything but the crushing weight of public scrutiny. Dalton caught up with her outside, grabbing her arm gently. "Victoria, wait. Let me go," she said dully. "Just let me go, Dalton. This is what I tried to tell you. This is why I am not worthy of you or your family." "Stop it," Dalton said harshly. "Stop pushing me away. I do not care what people in there think. I do not care about your past or about some vengeful criminal looking for you. All I care about is keeping you safe." "You should care," Victoria shot back, her voice rising. "Your reputation, your family's reputation, could be damaged by association with me. People will talk. They will say terrible things. You should walk away now while you still can." "I am not walking away," Dalton said, his voice steady and sure. "Victoria, I meant what I said. I am falling in love with you. Some gossip and a threat from a man I have never met are not going to change that." Victoria felt something break inside her, the last of her defenses crumbling. She sagged against him, and Dalton caught her, his arms strong and certain around her trembling body. "I am so tired," she whispered. "I am so tired of running, of being afraid, of waiting for the past to destroy me." "Then stop running," Dalton said into her hair. "Stay here. Let me help you. Let my family help you. You do not have to face this alone." "I do not know how to do anything else," Victoria admitted. "You will learn," Dalton promised. "Starting tonight, come back to the ranch with me. You can stay in Catherine's room and we will figure out the rest tomorrow." Sarah and Robert Zimmerman materialized out of the darkness, having followed them from the hall. "Dalton is right," Sarah said firmly. "You are coming home with us, Victoria. No arguments. You are part of this family now, whether you realize it or not, and we protect our own." Victoria looked at the three of them, this family that had welcomed her with such open hearts, and felt something shift inside her. Maybe she did not have to be alone. Maybe she did not have to carry the weight of her past entirely by herself. Maybe, just maybe, she could allow these people to care about her. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Victoria sandwiched between Dalton and his father on the wagon seat, while Sarah and Catherine followed in another wagon they had brought for the occasion. When they arrived, Sarah hustled Victoria inside and up to Catherine's room, which the younger woman was already gleefully offering to share. "We can have midnight conversations like sisters," Catherine said, pulling out a nightgown for Victoria to borrow. "I have always wanted a sister." "Catherine, let the poor girl breathe," Sarah admonished, but her eyes were warm. "Victoria, you are safe here. Try to get some rest and we will talk more in the morning." but sleep proved elusive. Victoria lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to Catherine's gentle breathing from across the room. Her mind churned with fear and confusion. Garrett Harrison was coming for her. A man she had never met, driven by loyalty to a brother who had been a monster, was hunting her, and now she had dragged Dalton and his family into her mess. A soft knock on the door made her sit up. "Victoria!" Dalton's voice was barely a whisper. "Are you awake?" She slipped out of bed and opened the door a crack. Dalton was standing in the hallway, still fully dressed, his hair disheveled as if he had been running his hands through it. "I could not sleep," he admitted. "I keep thinking about that man coming after you, and it is driving me crazy." "You should not worry about me," Victoria said. "This is my problem to deal with." "When are you going to get it through your head that your problems are my problems now?" Dalton asked, reaching through the crack in the door to take her hand. "Victoria, I am not some passing acquaintance. I am the man who loves you. That means when someone threatens you, they threaten me too." "You really love me?" Victoria asked, her voice small and uncertain. "With everything I am," Dalton confirmed. "And I am going to prove it to you every single day until you believe it." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender and old-fashioned that Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Get some sleep," he said gently. "Tomorrow we will make a plan, and we will face this together." The next morning dawned bright and cold, frost glittering on the grass outside the window. Victoria woke to find Catherine already dressed and bouncing with energy. "Ma is making a big breakfast," the younger woman announced. "And Pa and Dalton are going into town to talk to the marshals. Come on, get dressed." Breakfast was indeed a substantial affair, with eggs, bacon, biscuits, gravy, and strong coffee that helped clear the fog from Victoria's tired mind. Robert and Dalton left shortly after, promising to return by afternoon with news. Victoria offered to help Sarah with the dishes, grateful for the distraction of physical work. "You do not have to be afraid here," Sarah said as they worked side by side at the wash basin. "Robert and Dalton are both excellent shots, and we have ranch hands who are loyal to this family. If this Harrison man shows up, he will find himself facing more than he bargained for." "I never wanted to bring trouble to your doorstep," Victoria said quietly. "Trouble finds us all eventually," Sarah replied philosophically. "What matters is how we face it." "Dalton cares for you deeply, Victoria. I have never seen him this way about a woman before. He is my son, and I trust his judgment. If he believes you are worth fighting for, then so do I." The simple declaration brought tears to Victoria's eyes. "Thank you," she managed to say. The day passed slowly, Victoria helping with various household tasks while Catherine chattered and Sarah went about her work with calm efficiency. Several ranch hands stopped by the house at various points, and Victoria realized Sarah was positioning them as guards, ensuring someone was always nearby. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. Dalton and Robert returned in the late afternoon, their expressions grim. "The marshals have set up watch around town," Dalton reported. "They have telegraphed other law enforcement agencies across Colorado, and they believe Harrison is definitely in the state. Someone matching his description was seen in Grand Junction 3 days ago." "Grand Junction is not that far from here," Victoria said, her stomach knotting with fear. "Which is why you are staying here," Robert said firmly. "We have talked to the hands and everyone knows to be on alert for strangers. You are not to go anywhere alone, Victoria. Not even to the barn or the outhouse." It was humiliating to be so restricted, but Victoria understood the necessity. She nodded her acceptance and Dalton crossed the room to pull her into his arms. "We will get through this," he murmured against her hair. "I promise." The next few days fell into an uneasy routine. Victoria stayed at the ranch, helping Sarah with cooking and cleaning, learning the rhythms of ranch life. Dalton was constantly nearby, finding excuses to work close to the house, and Victoria found herself relaxing slightly in the cocoon of protection the Zimmerman family had woven around her. In the evenings after dinner, Dalton would take her for short walks around the property, always within sight of the house, and they would talk for hours. "Tell me about your childhood," Dalton asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Before everything went wrong." "What were you like?" Victoria thought back to a time that seemed impossibly distant. "I was ordinary. My parents had a small farm in Missouri. I had two brothers, both older, and they were both killed in the war. Ma died of fever when I was 15, and Pa followed her a year later. I think his heart just gave out from grief. I had no family left, and Thomas seemed like an answer to my prayers. He offered security, a home, and I was too young to see the warning signs." "You were alone and vulnerable, and he took advantage of that," Dalton said, his voice tight with anger for the man he had never met. "Maybe," Victoria allowed. "Or maybe I was just foolish." "You were 17 and orphaned," Dalton countered. "Any mistakes you made were understandable." His cruelty was not. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Dalton spoke again. "When this is over, when Harrison is caught and you are safe, I want to court you properly. I want to take you on picnics and to church socials. I want everyone in Palisade to see that I am proud to be with you. And eventually, when you are ready, I want to marry you." Victoria's breath caught. "Dalton, you cannot be serious." "I am completely serious," he said, taking her hand. "I know it is fast, and I know you need time to heal and to learn to trust again, but I want you to know my intentions. I am not playing games, Victoria. I want a future with you." "I might not be able to have children," Victoria whispered, voicing one of her deepest fears. "The doctor said the damage from the beatings might prevent me from carrying a baby to term." "Then we will adopt," Dalton said simply. "Or we will raise horses and cattle and love each other. Victoria, I want you, not some idealized future that may or may not happen. You are enough, exactly as you are." She turned to him, and in the fading light, his storm-gray eyes were full of such love and certainty that Victoria felt something inside her begin to heal. "I do not deserve you," she said, but there was less conviction in her voice than before. "You deserve everything," Dalton replied, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her believe, just for a moment, that it might be true. A week after the dance, Marshal Davis rode out to the ranch with news. "We have located Harrison," he told the assembled family. "He was spotted in a town about 30 miles south of here. We have men moving to apprehend him, but I wanted to warn you to stay vigilant. There is a chance he might slip the net and head this way." "How dangerous is he?" Robert asked. "Very," the marshal said grimly. "He got into a fight at a saloon 2 days ago and put a man in the hospital. He has been drinking heavily and talking about his brother, about how justice was never served. In his current state, he is unpredictable and violent." Dalton's jaw tightened. "We will be ready." After the marshal left, Dalton insisted on teaching Victoria to shoot. "I know you know how to use a gun," he said, "but I want to make sure you are comfortable with it, just in case." They set up targets behind the barn, and Victoria proved to be a decent shot, though her hands shook slightly as she held the revolver. The weight of it, the smell of gunpowder, brought back memories of that terrible night with Thomas. But Dalton was patient, standing behind her, his arms guiding hers, his voice steady and calm. "You are safe," he kept saying. "You are safe, and I am here." That night, Victoria woke from a nightmare, her heart pounding and sweat soaking her nightgown. She stumbled out of bed, careful not to wake Catherine, and made her way downstairs for a glass of water. She was surprised to find Dalton in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a lamp burning low. "Could not sleep either?" he asked. Victoria shook her head and sat down across from him. "I keep dreaming about Thomas, about that night, and now Garrett is mixed in and I cannot tell what is memory and what is fear." Dalton reached across the table and took her hand. "Come here," he said, pushing back his chair. When Victoria hesitated, he added, "Please." She went to him, and he pulled her onto his lap, cradling her against his chest like something precious. "I have got you," he murmured, his hand stroking her back in slow, soothing circles. "Nothing is going to hurt you, I promise." Victoria buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of him, soap and leather and something uniquely Dalton. "I am so afraid," she admitted. "Not just of Garrett, but of losing this, losing you. You have given me hope for the first time in years, and the thought of something taking that away is terrifying." "Nothing is going to take me away," Dalton said fiercely. "Victoria, I am here for the long haul. Whatever comes, we face it together." They stayed like that for a long time, Victoria curled on Dalton's lap, his arms wrapped securely around her. Eventually, her breathing steadied and she dozed, lulled by the steady beat of his heart. When she woke near dawn, she was in Catherine's room, tucked under the blankets with no memory of how she got there. But she felt safe, genuinely safe, for the first time since the marshals had appeared at the dance. 2 more days passed without incident. Victoria began to hope that perhaps the marshals had caught Garrett, that the threat had been neutralized. But on the 3rd day, in the late afternoon, everything fell apart. Victoria was in the kitchen with Sarah, preparing vegetables for dinner, when they heard shouting from outside. Dalton burst through the door, his face pale. "He is here." One of the hands spotted a man matching Harrison's description approaching from the south. "Pa has sent someone to town to fetch the marshals, but it will take time. Victoria, you need to hide." "I am not hiding," Victoria said, setting down the knife she had been using. "I am tired of hiding from Thomas, from my past, from everything. If Garrett Harrison wants to confront me, then let him come." "Victoria, be reasonable," Sarah urged. "This man is dangerous." "And I am done being a victim," Victoria replied. She looked at Dalton, seeing the fear and frustration in his eyes. "I need to face this, Dalton. Can you understand that?" Dalton stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "But you are not facing him alone. If he wants to get to you, he goes through me first." They went out onto the porch together, Dalton positioning himself slightly in front of Victoria. Robert and 3 of the ranch hands were in the yard, all armed, all watching the road. Catherine peeked out from the house, and Sarah pulled her back inside, though Victoria could see them watching through the window. The man who rode up to the ranch was clearly drunk, swaying in the saddle, his clothes dirty and his face unshaven. But even in his dishevelment, the resemblance to Thomas was striking, the same narrow eyes, the same cruel set to his mouth. Garrett Harrison looked at the assembled men, then his gaze found Victoria on the porch. "There she is," he slurred, pointing an unsteady finger. "The murdering bitch who killed my brother." "Get off my property," Robert said coldly. "Not until I get justice for Thomas," Garrett said, dismounting with exaggerated care. He reached for the gun at his hip, and immediately every man in the yard raised their weapons. "Do not do it," Dalton warned. "You are outnumbered, Harrison. Ride away now and maybe the marshals will go easy on you." "Thomas was a good man," Garrett said, his voice rising. "She killed him in cold blood. She deserves to hang." "Your brother was a monster," Victoria said, stepping forward despite Dalton's attempt to stop her. "He beat me for 4 years. He killed the children I tried to carry. He broke my bones and my spirit, and when I finally fought back, a jury of 12 people agreed I had the right. You want justice? There is no justice to be had here, Mr. Harrison. Only the consequences of your brother's cruelty. You are a liar, Garrett screamed, and his hand moved toward his gun. Everything happened very fast. Dalton shoved Victoria behind him as Garrett cleared leather. Multiple shots rang out, the sound deafening in the quiet afternoon. Garrett Harrison jerked backward, his gun falling from his hand, and collapsed into the dirt. Blood bloomed across his chest, and his body went still. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Robert was striding forward, kicking Garrett's gun away and checking for a pulse. He looked up at the assembled group and shook his head. He is dead. Victoria felt her legs give out, and Dalton caught her, lowering her carefully to the porch. It is over, he said, his voice shaking. Victoria, it is over. She could not speak, could not think. She had watched a man die, had been the cause of it, even if she had not pulled the trigger. It was Thomas all over again, the violence and the blood and the finality of death. He drew first, one of the ranch hands said, his voice steady despite the pallor of his face. We all saw it. He was going to shoot Miss Victoria. Marshal Davis and his deputy arrived an hour later, brought by the ranch hand Robert had sent. They examined the scene, took statements from everyone present, and covered Garrett Harrison's body with a tarp. Clear case of self-defense, Davis pronounced. Harrison was wanted for multiple crimes, and he drew on unarmed civilians. There will be an inquest, but I do not foresee any charges. Victoria sat through it all in a daze, answering questions mechanically while Dalton stayed close, his hand never leaving hers. When the marshals finally left, taking Garrett's body with them, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that seemed obscene in their beauty. That night, Victoria could not stop shaking. Sarah made her tea and wrapped her in blankets, but nothing helped. She had thought facing Garrett would bring closure, but instead she felt only exhaustion and a deep, abiding sadness. Another man was dead because of her, regardless of the circumstances. Dalton stayed with her, holding her through the long night, murmuring reassurances that she barely heard. It was only when dawn broke, soft and pink through the window, that Victoria finally spoke. I cannot escape it, she said hoarsely. Death follows me. First Thomas, now Garrett. How many people have to die before I pay for my sins? You have not sinned, Dalton said firmly. Victoria, listen to me. Thomas made choices that led to his death. He chose to abuse you, to terrorize you, to push you to the point where you had to defend yourself. Garrett made choices too. He chose to come here to threaten you, to draw a weapon. Their deaths are not on your hands. But if I had never existed, if I had never married Thomas, they would both still be alive, Victoria argued. And you might be dead, Dalton countered. Thomas would have killed you eventually. You know that. And Garrett was a violent criminal who would have ended up shot by the law or by someone else. You cannot take responsibility for the actions of evil men, Victoria. She looked at him, this good man who had somehow seen past all her flaws and failures to love her anyway. How are you so sure? Because I know you, Dalton said simply. I see your heart, Victoria. I see your kindness and your courage. What happened to you was a tragedy, but it does not define you. You get to choose who you are now, today, in this moment. And I hope you choose to let yourself be happy. Victoria felt something shift inside her, a subtle but profound change. Maybe Dalton was right. Maybe she had been so focused on punishing herself that she had forgotten she had a choice. Thomas was dead. Garrett was dead. The past was over, and she was still here, still breathing, still capable of feeling and loving and living. I want to choose happiness, she whispered. I want to choose you. Then do it, Dalton urged. Choose me, choose us. Choose the future we can build together." Victoria leaned forward and kissed him, pouring into it all the love and gratitude and hope she could not find words for. Dalton responded with equal fervor, his arms tightening around her as if he would never let go. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Victoria rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily for the first time. "I love you, Dalton Zimmerman." "I love you too," Dalton replied, his voice rough with emotion. "So much, Victoria. More than I can ever say." The inquest 2 weeks later was a formality. The judge reviewed the evidence, heard testimony from the marshals, the Zimmermans, and the ranch hands, and ruled Garrett Harrison's death a justifiable homicide. Victoria's name was cleared, both of Garrett's accusations and of any wrongdoing in his death. She walked out of the courthouse a free woman, truly free for the first time in years. That evening, Dalton asked her to take a ride with him. They saddled Rosie and Ace and rode out to the overlook where he had first kissed her, where she had first dared to believe that maybe she could have a second chance. The November air was cold but clear, and Victoria could see forever from their vantage point, the valley spread out below them like a promise. "I have been thinking," Dalton said as they stood side by side, the horses grazing peacefully behind them, "about the future, about what we both want." "And what do you want?" Victoria asked, though she thought she might already know the answer. Dalton turned to face her, and to her surprise, he dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I want to marry you, Victoria Vaughn. I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to work the ranch together, build a home together, face whatever challenges come our way together. I know you have been through hell, and I know you might need time, but I also know that I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me?" Victoria stared at the ring in the box, a simple gold band with a small sapphire that caught the light. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, the pain and the fear, the guilt and the shame. And then she thought about Dalton, about his unwavering belief in her, about the way he had proven with every touch, every word, every action that she was worthy of love. "Yes," she said, the word coming out on a sob. "Yes, Dalton, I will marry you." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he slid the ring onto her finger, and Victoria stared at it through tears of joy. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They married a month later in a small ceremony at the ranch. The only guests were the Zimmerman family, a few close friends from town, and Marshall Davis, who had become an unexpected ally. Victoria wore a simple white dress that Sarah had helped her make, and Dalton stood at the makeshift altar in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked toward him on Robert's arm. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Dalton kissed Victoria with such tenderness that several people in the small assembly were moved to tears. Catherine wept openly, and Sarah dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even Robert looked suspiciously bright-eyed. The wedding supper was a joyous affair, with food and music and dancing. Victoria found herself pulled into conversation after conversation, welcomed fully into the community that had once been just a place to hide. People who had gossiped about her after the dance now congratulated her warmly, accepting her as Dalton's wife and, by extension, as one of their own. That night, in the room that Dalton had prepared for them in the ranch house, Victoria stood before her new husband feeling nervous and uncertain. She had been married before, but that had been to a man who took pleasure in causing pain. This was different, but the memories were hard to shake. Dalton seemed to sense her anxiety. "We do not have to do anything," he said gently, taking her hands. "We can just sleep if that is what you want." "There is no rush, Victoria. We have the rest of our lives." But Victoria shook her head. She wanted this, wanted to replace the memories of Thomas's cruelty with something beautiful. "I want to," she said softly. "I am just afraid I will not know how to be with someone who is kind." "Then we will learn together," Dalton said. He reached up and gently unpinned her hair, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, and the reverence in his voice made her believe it. What followed was a revelation. Dalton touched her as if she were precious, kissed her as if he had all the time in the world, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Victoria's eyes. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Victoria felt the last of her walls crumble. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" Dalton asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "For seeing me. For believing in me when I could not believe in myself. For proving me wrong." "Wrong about what?" "I told you I was unworthy of a good man," Victoria said. "But you proved me wrong with every tender touch. You showed me that I deserve to be loved, to be happy. You saved me, Dalton." "No," Dalton said, tilting her face up so he could look into her eyes. "You saved yourself, Victoria. You survived, you fought, you kept going even when it would have been easier to give up. All I did was love you. That was the easy part." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time in years, Victoria slept through the night without nightmares. The years that followed were not without challenges. Victoria struggled sometimes with the ghosts of her past, with moments of doubt and fear that crept in unbidden. But Dalton was always there, patient and loving, reminding her of her strength and worth. The ranch became truly their home, and Victoria discovered she had a talent for managing the business side of things, keeping the books and negotiating prices with the cattle buyers who came through each season. 2 years into their marriage, Victoria realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. The doctor, the same kindly doctor, Wallace, who had attended most of Palisade, examined her carefully and pronounced her healthy, though he cautioned that she would need to take it easy given her history. Dalton was beside himself with excitement and worry. He hovered over Victoria constantly, driving her to distraction with his concern. "I am not made of glass," she told him one evening as he tried to prevent her from helping with dinner. "The doctor said I could continue normal activities." "You are carrying our child," Dalton said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Forgive me for wanting to wrap you in cotton wool and protect you from everything." Victoria softened, taking his hand in hers. "I know you are afraid, I am too, but I am also hopeful, Dalton. For the first time, I believe I can do this. I believe we can do this." The pregnancy was difficult. Victoria suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and as she grew larger, her old injuries made carrying the weight painful. But she persevered, supported by Dalton's unwavering love and Sarah's experienced guidance. Catherine, now 20 and courting a young rancher from a neighboring property, was excited about becoming an aunt and spent hours helping Victoria prepare the nursery. In the spring of 1881, on a sunny April morning, Victoria gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when both Dr. Wallace and Sarah looked worried, but Victoria fought with every ounce of strength she possessed. When the baby's first cry filled the room, Dalton, who had insisted on being present despite the impropriety, wept openly. "You did it," he said hoarsely, kissing Victoria's sweat-dampened forehead as Sarah placed the baby in her arms. "You did it, my love." Victoria looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect features and shock of dark hair, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He is beautiful," she whispered. They named him Robert Thomas Zimmerman, honoring both Dalton's father and, in a gesture that spoke to Victoria's healing, acknowledging the complicated past that had brought them together. Little Robert, or Bobby as he quickly became known, was adored by the entire family. Grandfather Robert claimed his namesake had his eyes, while Sarah insisted the baby had Victoria's nose. Life settled into a new rhythm. Victoria juggled motherhood with her responsibilities on the ranch, and found to her surprise that she was good at both. Bobby thrived, growing into a curious and affectionate toddler who followed his father around the ranch like a shadow. On Bobby's second birthday, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body having apparently remembered what to do. In the winter of 1883, Victoria gave birth to a daughter, a tiny girl with Dalton's storm-gray eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. They named her Sarah Catherine, after the two women who had helped Victoria find her place in the world. Catherine, now married to her rancher and living on the adjacent property, visited constantly, doting on her niece and nephew. Robert and Sarah, both getting older but still vital, delighted in their grandchildren. The ranch house was filled with noise and laughter, with the chaos of family life that Victoria had never dreamed she could have. One evening, when Bobby was 5 and Sarah Catherine was 2, Victoria stood on the porch watching the sunset. Dalton came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far I have come," Victoria said softly. "When I stepped off that stagecoach in Palisade 7 years ago, I was broken and convinced I did not deserve anything good. And now look at me. I have a husband I love, 2 beautiful children, a family that has accepted me completely. It feels like a dream." "It is not a dream," Dalton said, turning her to face him. "It is real, Victoria. This life, this happiness, it is all real and you earned every bit of it." "I could not have done it without you," Victoria said, reaching up to cup his face. "You never gave up on me, even when I had given up on myself. You proved to me that I was worthy of love, of tenderness, of a second chance. I will never be able to thank you enough for that." "You thank me every day," Dalton replied. "Just by being here, by building this life with me, by giving me a family and a love I never thought I would have. We saved each other, Victoria. That is what people who love each other do." Victoria kissed him as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Inside the house, she could hear Bobby laughing at something his grandfather said, and Sarah Catherine's delighted babbling. This was her life now, full and rich and beautiful. The shadows of her past would never fully disappear, but they had lost their power to define her. She was Victoria Zimmerman, beloved wife and mother, respected member of the community, survivor of horrors that had made her strong. And every morning, when she woke beside the man who had loved her back to life, she thanked whatever providence had brought her to Palisade, to this ranch, to Dalton. The tender touch of a good man had proven her wrong about so many things, but most importantly, it had proven that she was worthy of love, of happiness, of a life lived fully and without shame. And that made all the difference. As the years continued to roll by, the Zimmerman ranch prospered. Bobby grew into a capable young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's sharp mind for business. He was 12 when Victoria gave birth to another child, a surprise late in life that both delighted and terrified her. Another boy. They named him Daniel after Dalton's grandfather, and his arrival brought new energy to the household. Sarah Catherine, growing into a beautiful and spirited young woman, inherited her Aunt Catherine's enthusiasm and her mother's quiet strength. She had no memory of the troubled woman who had arrived in Palisade all those years ago, knowing only the mother who had loved her fiercely from her first breath. On Victoria's 35th birthday, the family gathered for a celebration. Catherine and her husband brought their 3 children. The ranch hands who had been with them for years joined in, and several families from town made the trip out to the ranch. It was a joyous occasion, filled with food and music and the warmth of community. As Victoria stood in the midst of the celebration, watching Dalton dance with Sarah Catherine while Bobby tried to teach young Daniel the steps, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. The girl who had killed her husband in desperate self-defense, who had fled to Colorado convinced she was irredeemably damaged, no longer existed. In her place was a woman who had learned that worthiness was not something to be earned, but something to be accepted. That night, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, Victoria and Dalton walked out to their favorite spot, the overlook where he had proposed all those years ago. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by any nearby light, and the night air was cool and fresh. "Do you remember what you told me the first time we stood here?" Victoria asked, leaning into Dalton's side. "I told you I wanted to marry you," Dalton said, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I wanted to build a life with you." "And you did," Victoria said. "We did." "Dalton, I want you to know that I would not change a single thing about my life if it meant not ending up here with you. All the pain, all the fear, all of it was worth it because it led me to you." "I feel the same way," Dalton replied. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria. You and our children, this life we have built, it is more than I ever dreamed possible." They stood together in the darkness, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from the broken pieces of a shattered past. The tender touches that had once been proof of Victoria's worthiness had evolved into something deeper, a partnership built on respect, love, and unshakable commitment. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon, and somewhere in the house, one of the children stirred in sleep. The Colorado wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. Victoria rested her head on Dalton's shoulder and smiled, finally at peace with who she was and the life she had claimed for herself. The story of the woman who thought herself unworthy and the cowboy who proved her wrong had become a legend of sorts in Palisade, told in the general store and at church socials, as an example of the redemptive power of love. But for Victoria and Dalton, it was simply their truth, the foundation of a life well lived and a love that had conquered every obstacle placed in its path. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. Not because fate had decreed it, not because she had earned it through suffering, but because she had chosen it. She had chosen to trust Dalton, to open her heart despite the fear, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved the happiness he offered. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference. The shadows of her past would always be part of her story, but they no longer defined her. She was Victoria Zimmerman, beloved and worthy, living proof that tender love could heal even the deepest wounds and that second chances, when seized with courage, could lead to lives more beautiful than anything imagined. The ranch house door closed behind them, shutting out the night and enclosing them in the warm glow of home. Their story, which had begun with fear and doubt, had found its happy ending in the tender touches and unwavering love of a good man, and a woman who had learned to believe she deserved him. And in Palisade, Colorado, in the year 1891, that was more than enough.